So hello, everyone, and welcome to Jolie Ngo's Artist in Resident Opening Artist Talk. I'm Nathan Stanfield. I'm the studio manager at the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Southern California. AMOCA champions the art, history, creation, and technology of ceramics through exhibitions, collections, outreach, and studio programming. Today's Artist Talk focuses on the work of Jolie Ngo, who has just begun a year-long residency in the AMOCA Studio. AMOCA's Artist in Resident program, established in 2012, is one of the few long-term fellowship opportunities for ceramic artists on the West Coast. Our residency program provides artists an opportunity to produce or develop a new body of work, and is funded generously through the support of Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay, and the Wingate Foundation. The next call for residency applications will begin beginning of January 2024. So stay tuned for more coming up soon. Today, Jolie will be sharing some of the work she's completed recently here, as well as before arriving, and talk about plans for her time as artist in resident here at AMOCA. Now I'm excited to tell you a little bit about Jolie. Jolie Ngo is a ceramic artist who expands the potential of the vessel form by creating vibrant cyborgian objects that acknowledge past ceramic traditions while advancing forward-thinking practices. In her own words, "I want to show the ceramic vessel as a future form that can still hold memories of the past." Born and raised in and outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, she holds a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. Jolie is in residence here at AMOCA from September of this year to August of next year. So before Jolie starts her presentation, I want to remind everybody that this is being recorded. It'll be released in a few weeks as well. And there'll be a moment at the end for Q&A. So we'll open that up after the talk. But now I will turn the presentation over to Jolie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm gonna get started. Cool. So I'm Jolie Ngo. I'm a mixed media ceramic artist from Philadelphia, and now I live in Pomona. I just got here about a month ago. I did my BFA in ceramics at Rhode Island School of Design, and I just finished my MFA in ceramic art at Alfred University. And in my practice, I am working with tools that are digitally forward, mostly utilizing clay 3D printers and other modes of rapid prototyping. And with these tools, I am creating tabletop pottery objects / sculpture adjacent vessels that acknowledge early ceramic traditions while smiling towards the future. So this image I just took this morning. It's the table in my studio here at AMOCA. I have a few little projects going on that I'm not quite ready to talk about, but here they are. Something I am investigating in my practice is the synergy between handmade arts and technology. I want to make work that challenges our perception of what it means to craft an object. Working with a craft-based material like clay, there's always this emphasis on the relationship between your hands and the material. It's all about tactility, making the presence of your hand evident. Your hands are directly imparting an aura onto your work that embodies the emotive content of your touch. So what happens when you remove your hand from working directly with the material and replace it with a 3D printer? Are those objects doomed to being cold and hyper-perfect because they're lacking the warmth from the maker's hands? Or is it possible to create a sense of tactility? Can you 3D print a ceramic object that embodies sensitivity and intimacy? Can a digitally fabricated object feel sensual or vulnerable? These are some of the questions that motivate my practice, and my body of work has developed by challenging these ideas around the handmade and digital craft. But I am kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself. I feel like I need to walk it back a bit and give some context and perspective to why I'm like this, because I've not always been 3D printing clay or using digital tools in my practice at all. Also, because some of the things that I was thinking about early on in my ceramics career have now circled back and like still is influencing the work I'm making now. So this is my work from my junior year at RISD. And as you can see, I've always been a vessel maker. These are like crunchy, flat, hand-built vessels. And I started making this work because I was responding to this article, The Rise of the Hyperpot by Glenn Adamson. And I became obsessed with this idea of a hyperpot. In this article, Glenn describes it to be a ceramic object that thrives in a digital space, and that digital space specifically being Instagram. He goes on to unpack a lot of qualities that a hyperpot must possess in order to qualify for such a title: bright saturated colors, extreme glazing and textures, forms that are familiar enough that you can understand what they are, but distinct enough to have no idea of how they work. What is so striking and exciting to me about hyperpots is their ability to encapsulate dualities in just an image: past and present, traditional and futuristic, functional and sculptural. All of these qualities are pounded flat into a single frictionless plane. This article came out in 2019, which I personally think was like the peak of ceramics Instagram, meaning that I think that it was like the best time to be on Instagram as a ceramic artist. And there was just this like liveliness and enthusiasm amongst the community and people outside or adjacent to the ceramics community. And I found everything that was being posted really fresh and exciting. And it was really easy to connect with people who were working in the same material and generate friendship and conversation. And on the screen is a screenshot of Takuro Kawata's work. He is like one of the first artists mentioned in the Hyperpot article. Kawata was someone I was definitely following in 2019. He's like one of the OG Hyperpot makers, and I was taking notes. The next slide are a few artists that I was looking at when I was in undergrad. Lauren Mabry, whose work is an example of extreme glazing and saturated colors. I don't consider myself an extreme glazer, but I would like to think that I use gloop glaze both sparingly and tastefully. And Lauren was a person who sparked a curiosity within me about extreme glazing, which is now why I use those glazes in my practice today. Linda Lopez. I love these rocks and shapes and lint that Linda bespeckles her dust furries with. And this idea is something that I took into my own practice and adapted for my own work. Also, I'm just like a sucker for a good line blend. Toni Marsh, but like specifically this pot. I've always come back to this form, and these rock shelves are like so genius to me. I wish I thought of it first. These rock shelves like haunt my ceramic dreams. They heavily influence a strategy / form that I use in my own practice that I now call a sticker, which I will talk about more later. And of course, Betty Woodman, specifically her two-sided works like the one on screen. I started designing my vessels using the same logic that she built hers: flat cutout pieces that flange off a hollow form, painted with different images on the front and back. I designed the vessels in this way so that when the work is photographed or viewed straight on, all of the different layers would flatten out and create an image or painting. I was really only considering how the work would look when it was photographed, and having them stretch out on the sides meant that it would take up more real estate on screen. So you'll also notice throughout the talk that almost all of my work is flat or have flat planes that dictate the form. And this started with this body of work that's on screen. I was making these vessels with the idea that they live online. To be able to put them back into a digital habitat, I had to take an image of them, and taking an image of your work flattens it out. So I just took it a step even further by flattening out the work in real life. And that body of work set the groundwork for my BFA thesis project called 100 Faces. I slip casted the same form over 100 times, and that form shares the same sort of similar flat quality as my earlier hand-built vessels, and I treated each vessel differently. And even though it was the same form, I was glazing over and over again. And I would come into studio every day that year and lovingly dress these forms in hazy gradients, crunchy slip, liquid landslides of colors, decals, special effect glazes. I was creating a catalog for myself of what I believed to be a successful hyperpot. I don't think I realized this at the time, but this project really set the tone of my practice in terms of me being freed from feeling so precious about my work. I think because I was dressing the same form every day, it granted me the freedom to not be so precious about these objects. I felt totally free to just throw anything at them and try any surface treatment. And if it didn't work out the way I wanted to, it would be totally fine because I would just get another chance the next day. And this project also marked a turning point in my practice for a different reason also. This was the first time I ever used 3D modeling software to generate forms. I 3D modeled a prototype, printed it in plastic, and made a mold from it. And up until this point, I was super uninterested in digital tools because I equated this type of tool set with a very polished and hyper-refined aesthetic. Because at this point, that was the only type of work that I saw being made with them. And I felt like there was no way to get rowdy energy into like a computer-made object. And I wanted my work to have grit and like I didn't fuss over it in a way that I felt like computer-made objects do. So tangentially, while I was working on my 100 base project, I began 3D printing clay. This was the first time I ever printed the photo on screen. It was the first object I ever printed. And honestly, I was very hesitant to give this tool a chance. I felt like you had to be a certain way to be someone who 3D prints clay. And what do I mean by that? At this point, every artist and designer that I knew who 3D printed clay was maybe also like an architect or an engineer, or they were just very savvy with technology. And because I didn't like fit into any of those boxes, I just felt like this tool wasn't meant for me. And it felt so inaccessible, both with the steep learning curve that comes with working with a clay printer, and also the 3D printing community in general just kind of felt inaccessible to me because I didn't see myself represented within that community. But anyway, the next few slides will be a mix of some of my like first 3D printed clay vessels and some of the most recent vessels that I made this past year. The two on screen, I think, are like maybe like the second and third thing I ever printed out of clay. I hadn't really, and I made this vessel that's on screen this past year. I hadn't really done this comparison before this morning because when I knew I needed to throw some images of newer work into this artist talk. And it's so interesting to see these formal elements that have stayed present in my work, even after like 3 or 4 years of using this tool. In my earliest iterations, these like straight walls just grew directly out of the sides of my vessel, and now I feel like they've become way more dynamic. The surfaces on my vessel has also become a little bit more sophisticated, and I don't really find myself just like throwing every single idea I have onto one piece anymore. Actually, okay, this might have been a bad image choice on my part after saying that statement, but the surfaces just feel so much sharper and more impactful to me. So even though I was so hesitant to incorporate digital tools into my practice, it was something that clicked for me so immediately. This way of making also felt like a form of play that I didn't really experience when I was just hand building or slip casting. And it was only within the last year or so that I realized why it felt that way. And it was because I've been creating digitally from a very young age, definitely not at this level of sophistication, but that early exposure has really informed the aesthetic choices I make today and the forms I create themselves in that digital space. So let's talk about the beginning of my experience as a digital maker. And there's this concept called a nostalgia cycle. Every 20 years or so, popular culture experiences a 20-year nostalgia cycle where old bygone ideas and styles are resuscitated and brought back to life. And by that calculation, my generation is on track for experiencing nostalgia for our early digital lives, a longing for our first digital worlds, on-screen spaces where we could act, create, and communicate. And I recently began to reflect on the first digital worlds that I experienced when I was younger, some of the earliest being Windows 95, Microsoft Paint on my family's clunky PC in our living room, or the word art gallery on early Microsoft Word. These gradient fill presets are permanently burned into my brain, and these graphic styles from these first digital spaces in which I was able to be creative have found their way into the surfaces of my work today. Other early digital worlds that have made an impact not only on the aesthetic choices of my work, but also how I build my work. These other worlds being video game spaces, specifically genres, platform games, and sandbox games. Platform games are a video game in which the core objective is to move your character between different points in the environment. The landscapes in these games are like flat, pixelated paintings. They are not fully immersive, and as the viewer explores the page, the landscape moves by panning across a flattened image of mountain ranges, blue skies, and white clouds. The other category of game being a sandbox game with a gameplay element that provides a player a great degree of creativity to interact with, usually without any predetermined goal. These games like The Sims, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Animal Crossing, Minecraft, where the player becomes a world builder. And I would say that platform games influenced the surface and graphic qualities of my work, while sandbox games influenced how I make my work or what I'm building. Is Rhino and Minecraft really that different? I'm not sure. But Rhino 3D is my modeling software of choice. In essence is like a sandbox game. When opening the program, a square grid and an infinitely expansive environment appears where scale and gravity don't exist. In this digital space, I've developed an affinity for creating landscapes, regardless of what my intentions for form or function are. I open the software, I start building vessels out of rudimentary geometric shapes, and when the model is completed, it reads as landscape. Before I began 3D printing clay, my ceramic objects were clearly vessel. So what was it about these digital tools that was moving me to create this terrain? This question and the lingering nostalgia for my earliest digital worlds made me realize that I am creating landscape because I was conditioned to. When I sit down in front of my computer screen and open Rhino, it's like the muscle memories in my fingers only want or know how to create these other worlds. And these are some of the early worlds I was building. This is called a memory palace vessel. And the next few slides will all be memory palace vessels. And this one on screen is the first one I ever made in 2020 during my first semester of grad school. The Memory Palace Vessel series was created with the idea of making these future forms that hold ideas or memories of the past. A memory palace is a type of mnemonic device which uses the visualization of familiar landscapes or spatial environments in order to enhance the recall of information. The Memory Palace vessel has two distinct sides to them. The edges of these flat facades frame the vessel, creating what I like to think of as like a screen. And instead of thinking of these screens as a front or a back, I think of them both as being the front side. And when looking at the vessel straight on from either front side, it almost flattens the object to be an image of a landscape that your eye travels around, rather than your physical body traveling around or through the entirety of the form. This experience is analogous to walking your character through pixelated landscapes of early video game worlds. And another prominent but later addition to the Memory Palace vessels was this inclusion of what I call a sneaker or a shoe, which is this neon orange platform that the vessel is sitting on top of. Dealing with the foot of a 3D printed ceramic object was quite a challenge for me in the beginning. I never felt quite satisfied with the blank flat bottom that sat flush on the table. I would just sloppily scrawl my name across the bottom of the foot to sign my work, and it didn't really feel like a solution that fit my practice. So my solution was to create a shoe or a sneaker to put on the foot of my vessels, a 3D printed platform that floats the object a few centimeters off the table, creating an alluring glow on the surface below it. Process of translation. 3D printed ceramics goes through a process of translation when they're being made. And I often like to think or explain or think of this translation like that childhood game, Whispered Down the Lane or Telephone. A phrase is passed down the line, and by the time it reaches the last person, the saying or the phrase might sound like the original, but inevitably information gets lost as it goes from person to person. And 3D printing clay goes through a similar process of translation. A perfectly smooth gray rhino model gets converted multiple times into different file formats, and through translating that object to a format that is printable, smooth surfaces are broken up into strata, some forms get simplified in the slicing, and sometimes geometry ends up in unexpected places. But this information loss is not necessarily a deficit, but more of a welcome surprise. In my practice, there is no hierarchy between the digital and the physical. As much as I am an object maker, I am also an image maker, and these photos on screen represent the 3 different environments in which my work exists. In Rhino, the first image, the birthplace of all my work. The second image is the object as it exists away from my keyboard or in real life. And the third, I'm returning this born digital work back into its natural habitat by taking an image of it and posting it online. And the image and model of the object have equal importance to me than the physical object itself. I am shuttling this object back and forth between the digital and the physical, and through those different translations of the same object, some information is lost and some is gained. It may surprise you to hear this based on whatever preconceived idea you have of me, but I love rules and I love following rules. So I have created rules on how to make things in my practice. And I also would like to preface this section by saying that I'm really softening the idea of what a rule is. Also in this section, I will be walking you through the vocabulary that I use to describe frequently used forms or strategies in my work as well. A sticker. What is a sticker? This form on the screen is what I call a sticker vessel, and the flat printed slabs, shapes that are affixed to the surface are called stickers. For something to be considered a sticker, it must be some sort of like flat, slabby shape that is attached to the body of the vessel before it's fired. This is one of the more recent sticker vessels that I made. And there's like no one universal sticker shape either. But they have to be attached before they're fired, or else it's called something else. Okay, second rule I'm going to share is that I rarely consider anything to be a failure, and I will not abandon an object just because something terribly unexpected happened, such as the example currently on screen. I overfired the glaze and it ran all over the shelf and made this mess. And I just really believe that it's not over until I can no longer fire the work or until I can no longer keep epoxying things to the surface of it. And I actually feel like I'm rethinking this rule right now. This was probably true like 10 months ago when I wrote this artist talk, but I'm different now. And I think that it's okay to have failure in your practice. Just because something didn't work out as you planned it does not make it a waste of time because you gained valuable information for your next iteration. So maybe I can reframe this rule as like, it's not a failure, it's just information. And it's okay to just leave the object as that. You don't need to fix it. Okay. And because of that previous rule, before I just changed it, this idea of the Band-Aid was born, and all Band-Aids are stickers, but not all stickers are Band-Aids. It's giving like real all squares are rectangles, but not vice versa, if you know what I mean. And this is a photo of the fixed pot from the previous slide. And what I ended up doing was polishing and sanding the glaze that spilled on the pot and lustering it and applying rock chunks all over it, over the cracked and chipped areas. And in this case, the rocks are acting as a Band-Aid. And like I said before about stickers, anything can be a Band-Aid, but Band-Aids are only applied like cosmetic surgery. They are only ever applied to the object when it can no longer be refired. And I wanted to include this slide because Paige O'Toole, who is the other long-term resident who I also went to grad school with, gifted me these Band-Aids that I applied to this pot. And they're these like glassy aventurine glaze coins that like dripped off of a sculpture into sand that she made while we were in school together. So shout out to Paige. Yeah, another example of a Band-Aid. This one isn't performing any healing, so maybe it's a sticker. I don't know. Okay, skirts. A skirt is kind of like the foot of a vessel. And the skirt is this splayed finger near the bottom of the vessel that this like arrow's pointing to. Gears, which are similar to skirts, but different. The difference between gears and skirts is that there are 2 or more gears stacked on top of each other, like the example in this slide. And gears are similar to skirts, but the difference between gears and skirts is that there are 2 or more gears. Oh, I already said that, sorry. Gears differ from skirts in a way that they could be labeled as a part of the body of a vessel opposed to the foot. Okay, third rule. Material harmony must exist in my studio, or I don't practice material hierarchy. And I'm actually not sure if this is a rule, but it's more like a goal that I'm striving for in my practice. And this body of work, or this piece on screen, is a piece from my series of 3-legged vessels that I created for my MFA thesis show. This is the first 3-legged vessel that I created, and it also marked the beginning of this idea of material harmony in my practice, where the hierarchy material begins to dissolve and my practice becomes a little less ceramic-centric. Plastics, epoxy, wood, porcelain, glaze, magic sculpt, these materials live in harmony within this body of work. Okay, last rule I'll share. Keeping the integrity of the printer's touch. And what is the printer's touch? The printer's touch is not just the mechanical layering of coils. It is the unexpected movements and over-extrusions that produce painterly marks, pushed and ripped clay, and free-flowing coils. This is kind of where I feel like other folks who 3D print clay get it wrong. They remove these touches that the printer produces. So not only is this object devoid of your physical touch, but now it is also lacking the printer's touch as well. It just doesn't feel very honest to this way of making, and I know how often these glitches occur in the printing process. And to have to start that print over and over again until the object prints perfectly is a type of patience that I don't really want to have. Trying to remove the evidence of the printer's touch reinforces the notion that working digitally has an inherent coldness to it. I think when people think about 3D printed ceramics, they may picture a clean, streamlined design object. And I think that it is possible to create a sense of intimacy and tactility in 3D printed ceramics. Bringing the hand back into the process is an integral part of creating that sensibility, but so is keeping the integrity of the printer's touch. There is this certain level of skill and movement that are similar in making with both your physical hands and your digital hands. Your hands are performing sophisticated and unprecedented actions, these motions being small, quick, and repetitive, as in much of traditional clay techniques or other handcrafts. Your fingers that once made small, repetitive pinching motions when building have now transitioned into making even faster, smaller, repetitive motions in comparison. Your eyes are no longer on your hands at work, but on the screen. I'm using a clay 3D printer as an extension of my physical hands. My digital hand, which is guided by my physical hand, creates form in a digital landscape where scale and gravity don't exist. The lack of gravity in that virtual space comes with creating physical glitches in the printing process that I happily welcome in the work. My printer realizes these hyperpots as physical objects, and in a way, it feels like I am working collaboratively with this tool. I have to physically load the tubes with clay and home the Z-axis manually. I feed the printer the G-code. My printer and I's touch are intertwined, the printer leaving a trail of mark making in its path. I stack and connect prints together, leaving fingerprints and smudges where printed lines used to be. There is this rhythm present in the dialogue between us, and this way of making is not a hands-off experience. Maintaining a sense of tactility, intimacy, and sensitivity often achieved in traditional handworks is paramount to my practice, and this interplay of the machine in my hands results in a creation of objects that resist definition. And that's it.
Excellent. Thank you. That was fantastic. So thank you so much, Jolie. We have some time now for some questions. So feel free to either type your question out in the chat or use the little raised hand emoji, and we'll call on you. So we've got one question. You've mentioned in the past an interest in ceramic 3D printed furniture. Is this something you are still exploring?
Yeah, it is something that I'm still exploring. It's something that I am working on in studio here right now. But I don't really have that much to say about it at the moment. Because I'm mostly just experimenting, and yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for that question too. Let's see, Karen's got a question. How often do you keep 3D printed inclusions in your work without translating them into clay?
I don't know how to like answer this, I guess, but often, I don't know.
Yeah, 3D printed inclusions. Yeah.
Some things just, not everything needs to be clay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was touched upon in your marrying a bunch of different materials together. All right, another question. How do you feel about presenting your pots in galleries if they are made more for digital landscape? Do you miss working more directly with the clay via physical touch? Two-parter.
How do I feel about presenting my pots in galleries? Well, that's a good question. I don't really have an answer for that. But I'm gonna think about it. And do I miss working more directly with clay? I am like still working directly with clay. So I don't miss it.
Yeah, I guess one of the things not shown, and well, maybe it was shown in one of these earlier photos, is, and watching you work in the studio now, is how many different smaller parts you're printing and then compiling and putting everything together. So there is a lot, it seems like, of compiling and attaching and building. Another question here at the bottom. What were some of the preconceived notions towards 3D printing that you had before you began to include it in your practice?
Well, I mentioned it earlier in my talk that I just felt like I was really hesitant to try 3D printing, like, or just like digital fabrication in general, because I feel like most of the objects I saw were like hyper perfect and cold and streamlined, and that's not really something that like aligns within my own practice. So I felt like there wasn't really space for me there. That was like one of the preconceived notions I had.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you for that question. One more here at the bottom. Excuse me. Can you speak to why it is important to you to make the object physical at all? Why not just render the object digitally and stop there? Why is the physical translation necessary, or how does it complete your process?
I just don't think even that's a good question. I don't want to say I wouldn't be satisfied by just leaving it digital because I said both are just equally as important to me. But I don't know. I guess, yeah, I just wouldn't be satisfied with just keeping it as like a rendered object. And maybe that's because like I'm not very good at rendering things on the computer. I can like render them better physically. Why is this physical translation necessary? I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to think about that.
Yeah, I guess that kind of falls in with that telephone effect you mentioned. Like there's kind of a magic that happens too from, rendering it digitally, seeing what the printer does, and then seeing it finished. There's kind of that fun, I don't know, translation there, which you wouldn't get if it was just staying digital. Another question. Last one, we're going over a little bit, so this will be the last one for today. Thank you all for your questions. It feels like the translation and back translation across physical and virtual / digital is what makes the art complete. Oh, that's less a question and more a comment on the last one. Cool. Right on. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jolie, and for your excellent questions. For more of Jolie's work, you can visit our website, knowjolie.net. That'll get dropped in. Well, look at that. It's already there in the chat. And if you're in the neighborhood, come visit the museum and ceramic studio here in Pomona, California. You can learn more about AMOCA, our ceramic studio and artist in resident program, and current exhibitions and programming by visiting our website, amoca.org. And yeah, a recording of this presentation will be available in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all for joining us. See you soon. Thanks, guys.